Well, good afternoon again. Catherine and Darian, thanks again for coordinating all of this. It's a huge lift, right, to get all this set up and then to run it. I'm always impressed how well this has been working, and it's really because of your preparation. But my name is Troy Williams. I am essentially owner of and operator of Oasis Senior Advisors. We're a very hands-on, personalized level of service for senior placement is the terminology in the industry. We just help families and their loved ones find the right living and or care solution, whether they're coming out of a hospital stay or out of their homes when they can no longer be safe there. And it's a free service to families. And so this afternoon, I'm going to spend most of my time on three things. I have to break things up into powers of three. Otherwise I get lost. And so it helps me even kind of bring my thoughts together. So we're going to look ahead. This is about planning. This is planning toward the possibility of assisted living. And as Kim has talked about, the planning that you may or may never use, it's very similar, but my intent is eventually to work into what we're calling pay attention to the details. So as you're visiting with a loved one, that can be a mom, dad, a grandparent, or neighbor, right? Church member. What are some things to be looking for? And there's going to be a lot of detail in a checklist kind of fashion here. What should you be looking for that give you signals that there's going to be some assistance or help needed? Or maybe to bring a professional in to have a conversation. And then very briefly is what does it look like to take action on those plans and what you've been paying attention to. And so to back up kind of where we start, this is information or statistics that, if someone needs to have the conversation, it's very personal. Right? Every individual, every family, every situation becomes a very unique circumstance that stands alone from everyone else's in the world. There are always some common threads, but it helps to have a little information up front. So if you're not in a situation where your loved one is in the hospital and it's an urgent situation and they cannot come home, then I'm going to show you kind of a little bit later what we're going to do a little bit differently here on this checklist approach. But if you're planning in advance, just know, and some of this information you've seen before, fairly common, and I'm trying to narrow it down to Texas as much as I can here, but you look in the US, up until about 2030, that's when most of our baby boomers will be 65, about 10,000 of which I am one. I'm on the tail end there. 10,000 of us will turn 65 every day. And that's driving a significant demand in long-term care needs, not just in the US, but in Texas as well. In Texas, there's going to be a projected 37% increase in those who are 65 and above. And that's moving, you can see that's about 1.4 million more. So think of how it applies to supply and demand. Supply of assisted living, senior care, long-term care versus what's out there now. If we think we're at kind of capacity in a lot of places, and we are, there's a huge demand for the future, right? So, and then of that population, smaller piece of that pie, about, in the 85 plus, which is where you find from an average age, you find in assisted living or senior care, if you will, of a 42% increase in that age demographic up through 2030. So it's only growing. And one of the other forces behind that as a percentage of the total population is that our birth rates are down overall in the US. And so a higher percentage of the population really is going to be in that 65 plus, 85 plus demographic, which is going to put a significant pressure cost-wise on our healthcare system and the long-term care systems. About 70% of those who are above 65 will need some form of a long-term care network. And what I mean by the network is essentially that you're going to be in a hospital situation, perhaps, that you move then to a rehab or skilled nursing situation, maybe then going home with home health care, personal care, or maybe even to short-term or long-term uh, assisted living and or nursing care. That's a high percentage. All right. And so whoever actually need those components, and you may not need all of them, or your loved one may not need all of them, but the point is it's worth planning for. And then about 35% of Texans that are 65 and up are living with a disability of some kind. That's the demand, right? Remember, the supply was up here, and that in what I talked about earlier is the facilities and the network. But the 35%, the increase in the age demographic is going to put a significant pressure, in the system overall. So, the point is the needs are always going to be out there in increasing measure. Oddly enough, though, when we talk with families, most folks think that there's a large percentage of the senior population live in a community-based setting, and that can be anything from assisted living, independent living, nursing homes, and so on. But in reality, it's less than 10%. So it's a pretty small percentage of the population is outside of their homes. And that home can be an apartment, as an example, or it can be a home, or they can be living with family. And so again, a pretty small percentage when you look at it that way, but the need is still there. So as we look ahead, setting goals is going to be important. In the case where you need, or you think you may need, or you want to consider needing some long-term assistance or care, the goals are pretty generic. So when you think about how do you break this down into a manageable set of information, the first place you want to be, and most people, in fact, every client that I've ever had, honestly, never want to leave their homes. It's a natural place to live. It's a comfortable place to live, and it's yours. You've set roots down, but you need to make sure that over time that the home is safe. You can do what you need to do consistently and safely, and that it would include the possibility of any future care. And that care can come through that, that network that I mentioned earlier. So as you're visiting with a loved one during the holiday season, or maybe someone's visiting with you, do you need just to get organized around the home? Declutter. I think we're creatures of habit. So if we've got habits of creating piles, I'm one, I like to create piles. And because it gives me something to come back to and work on is how do you get rid of that? How do we just kind of clean up, free up that area? Should you downsize? Maybe simplify your floor plan. In Houston, many of the homes are 2-story, and it's just because it tends to be cheaper by the square foot, but still, a 2-story home may not be where you need to be long-term. So how do you simplify that floor plan? And then as you're considering that, how do you document, or you should be documenting a schedule of physical/safety or safety changes? And that can come in a number of forms. At its basic level, if 35% of seniors are living with some form of disability, that can be an effect on your mobility, that type of disability, where you might need a cane, a walker, a wheelchair. And is your environment really safe and supportive of that kind of disability or need? And that can be anything from ramps to widened doorways to removing the transitions of carpet to flooring and so on. And it can mean a lot of other things as well. And as Kim mentioned earlier, do you need to update or even create your estate planning documents? And that point will apply regardless of where you're starting, whether that's at home or whether that's coming from a hospital. But as you go through this possibility of staying at home in this planning session, find the experts who can help you. And a professional organizer, there's several agencies like that in the area, can kind of really help you pick and choose from a concierge type approach or an a la carte type approach of how do I get started? Maybe it's just with my garage. I need that help. Or maybe it's with, a bedroom or closet space. So again, just to kind of make sure things are safe. It could be a certified aging in place specialist. I mean, to be able to simplify your floor plan to make your current environment physically safe, the certified aging in place specialist would be very helpful. Someone who can say, look, you're going to need eventually, if your plan is to stay here, you're going to need some safety in the bathroom. That's a very common area. Grab bars in the shower, maybe a change in your bathtub to a walk-in tub or a walk-in shower. Those aren't always needed, but at least you get that information. And that's just one example. And then the other is, do you have an attorney, an estate planning attorney, or even in some cases an elder law attorney, if you're wanting to bring in that asset protection variable? That's where that really comes in handy, especially if it's going to be a Medicaid type situation. So again, that's the thriving at home. And that's where, again, everyone wants to stay. So if 70% of our seniors end up in the healthcare system, that long-term care system, and it can be short-term, then are you prepared to use it correctly or to the best of its ability? Because, it's not a perfect system, but it's a good system. The questions you want to ask in cases like this is my medical insurance widely accepted? We've all been seeing the Joe Namath commercials. It's the open enrollment period for Medicare, and they're throwing hooks at you. Okay, they're casting hooks, transportation, meals, hearing aids, and while some of those things are good, okay, and they're beneficial, they may not need to be where you're spending your money. Reconsider original Medicare with a supplement as an example. So just make sure that your insurance is as widely accepted as it can be, or it fits your needs. And some of those needs are going to be, does it support your preferred hospital network? So if you're living in Houston, as an example, you've got a pretty darn strong medical system here. Houston Methodist, Memorial Hermann, St. Luke's, HCA. I mean, there's a host of opportunities, possibilities. Which one do you prefer? And it may vary based on the need, but by and large, you get to pick for the most part. So pick one and document it. A little checklist that you can refer to, or someone who needs to refer to it, like an emergency medical technician who has to come into the home and you have to take an ambulance ride, or your loved one has to take an ambulance ride, and they're going to ask you, where do you want them to go? You already have it written down. We want to go to St. Luke's, let's say. And it can be wherever the location might be. And then do the same for your preferred facilities for rehab. That would usually include both what was called originally or earlier as a post-acute or an acute rehab hospital. That's where that same level of Medicare care is covered, or it could be a skilled nursing facility. And it can be for other reasons. It doesn't have to be for physical therapy or occupational therapy or so on. It could be other needs there medically. But you want to check to see which ones will accept your insurance. And there are folks out there, I can help with that, or others, simply a phone call, going to a website for that particular company can tell you what insurances they actually accept. Because a lot of those are contracted with the companies, the Medicare Advantage plans. They're all based on contracts with these facilities other than Medicare. Medicare is the most widely accepted. And then do the same for your preferred home health and personal care agencies. So as you come through the system, you're going to go home with orders, for the most part, many times, with ongoing therapy, physical, occupational, and what have you, wound care, maybe, some other nursing care, and then eventually someone that's going to help you with your activities of daily living, the bathing, grooming, dressing, and so on. That's your personal care agency. So do you have one or two of those documented that you'd prefer to use because you've interviewed them or talked to them beforehand, and they're listed, phone numbers, names, and so on. So this is some of that information you can document, keep with a packet like some of your medical directive that you really want an emergency medical person to reference. That way, you're making a choice earlier on your own behalf or your loved one's behalf, and you're not trying to make that decision based on, an urgent and emotional time. Are you going to be emotional, and is it going to be an urgent circumstance? Yes. But having some of this documented, if not all of it documented initially, will take a little stress off your plate. And then that third step, if the need, just to be planning in advance, the need may never come up, but you may need, or your loved one may need, assisted living. And that's what we call a community-based hospitality or care options. There's this kind of move afoot to call it senior hospitality. It's just a softer, gentler way to put it all, but still, where is it you'd be looking to change to? And again, this is just a ink on paper. But for me personally, one of the first independent living communities that I had visited, I was really almost ready to write a check. I am personally ready to get out of my home and downsize. My wife, not so much. And so we're still here. But could it be just a 55 active adult community? Those are just apartment complexes that serve a 55 and up demographic. Independent living communities where you're simply, again, downsizing, but it comes with certain programs and services that are beneficial. Transportation, meal plans are two big ones. Maybe it's assisted living. Or maybe you're planning, because of either finances or asset protection needs, you're planning for someone eventually to be long-term nursing care, or at least have that ability to move into that. Kind of the point is, and then we were talking about this earlier, is get eyes on these places early. So if you're going to be staying in the area, that's your desire. Again, this is just ink on paper. Visit a few of these places, pull up a professional. I operate again in this environment. This is exactly where I spend my days, is learn what your needs could be. And again, they may change. What would your affordability be, and where would you like to be geographically? Those three puzzle pieces. And go visit a few places so once you need to make that change, or if you need to make that change, where you could be going, or something like it. And you're familiar with it. Because I find that for many of my clients, there's not a more recent or current understanding and exposure to assisted living communities. There's always this historical view that everything is a nursing home. And if you remember nursing homes 20 years ago, you'll know what I'm talking about. Some of those still exist, but not many. But assisted living, very different. So at least you've become educated in this planning effort. Doesn't mean it's going to get executed. And then the big question is always, how much does all this cost? And when it comes to funding, looking ahead in this planning component, there's really two ways essentially to pay for long-term care. There's the asset protection sources you see there on the left. That's your long-term care insurance. If you had the disposable income, the disposable income to pay for that early and then have that planning. You can sell life insurance dependent on the type of life insurance that it is and its death benefit value and other variables to help pay for long-term care. It's essentially a cash out option. That is doable, and it works for term insurance as well as it does for whole. You're essentially pulling up your death benefit to take advantage of that while you're still alive. And then there's the asset-based sources, and those are the ones we're all familiar with: your monthly income, any pensions you may have, any assets that are in savings, checking, IRA, equities, and so on, your real estate, so primary and or secondary residences or other property. And then there are some veteran benefits out there for low-income veteran families that are very beneficial. And if you may be wondering, and many of my clients do, how much of this will Medicare pay for? Absolutely nothing. It's not designed to pay for what we call custodial care. That's the bathing, grooming, dressing, toileting, these custodial care needs. It's medical insurance, straight up, that's it. Medicaid, on the other hand, does have programs to help pay for long-term care. So just briefly, think of Medicaid as a puzzle, and the puzzle pieces are different programs. And so there are different programs that fit the need. Probably one of the most widely used, at least in the long-term care industry, is nursing home Medicaid. It is a unique Medicaid program to help pay for, long-term nursing care. That'd be in the nursing home. So let's say, for example, that you're visiting a loved one over the holidays, And it's been a while since you've seen them. So when you've noticed initially as you come in, you've noticed some changes either in their environment, maybe in them. That can be anything from physical changes, more frail. It can be cognitive changes over the course of different conversations. You've noticed repeating questions, and there's a host of signals there. What I want to give you here are 6 areas to be looking at. And the reason I want you to be aware of these is it begins to tell you how you're going to execute your plan. One of those areas, and it's absolutely the most important of the 6, and this is all backed by 20 years of data, $85 million of research through a company locally here in Houston called Performance-Based Healthcare Solutions. How do you successfully manage your medical conditions? And that's, anything from high blood pressure, diabetes, there's a host of those, COPD, congestive heart failure, all of those come with medicines and prescriptions. So we always think about how do you manage your medicines correctly? Well, really, it's your conditions. Along with those conditions, we'll get into some details here in a minute. The other one that's very significant would be your mobility and safety within your environment that you live in and outside your environment. That includes places you may drive if you're still driving. And how do you get around? And are you safe getting around? That could include, any device that you're using, walker, wheelchair, cane, combination of those. Not at the same time, but depending on the length of how far you're having to traverse, on your feet, you may end up in a transfer wheelchair, for example. Can you safely and consistently complete your activities of daily living? Maybe the loved one has stopped showering, or you kind of note they haven't changed their clothes. You can just tell, when someone really hasn't changed their clothes recently, that either they're not capable physically or they're not capable cognitively. Something else is having an effect there. And these are just signals. We're not making judgments on causes yet. We're just saying this is what we're seeing. Are they able to keep up with their instrumental activities of daily living? Those are things like, are they keeping their checkbook balanced, paying their bills, washing their dishes, cooking their meals, getting their trash to the street, keeping their living area environment in healthy and safe order? In the extreme, you go to hoarding as an example, and it can get really, really, really bad. I've seen some. Have they stopped enjoying any meaningful activities? So maybe you knew of some hobbies that they had, and they've just stopped doing this just through conversation. Is there a caregiver already involved? Often it's a single caregiver that's doing all this work. So if I could emphasize anything in the next couple of slides, is that caregiving needs to be a system. We need to think of it as a system, not a person. Oh, my son will take care of me. Oh, my daughter will take care of me. I'm sorry, that's not a system. That's a person. And maybe that's your only option. I understand. But there still can be a system in place rather than a person. Because if it's a person, and I call it the chain of care, that's one link. One link fails, the whole system fails. And we don't want the caregiver to fail. So how do we care for the caregiver? We've had a couple of folks kind of talk about that already this morning. More detail so I'm going to go into some kind of checklist detail for you here. Catherine, I'm going to hold you responsible for keeping me on time here, so let me know. But I'll move through it pretty quickly. But note that there are 6 kind of lower level areas with regards to managing medical conditions. The one thing I want you to take away from this is these are habit changes. So, taking the medications on time, using a pill box is part of the system. Someone has to set that up. Someone has to maintain it. Someone has to be cognitive enough to actually do that. But the other things like making sure you get prescriptions coming in. So delivery is pretty easy to do now. Are you sure you're taking the right ones based on what the doctor has told you? That's the reconciled list of prescriptions. Are you maintaining precautions and restrictions? Meaning, should you not drink alcohol with some of these? These should be taken with food all the time. And so those are examples. And are they tracking their vitals? This is the tough one. It sounds simple, but it's difficult. I'll give you an example. The earliest signal of congestive heart failure and having a problem from it doesn't mean that you just have it, but having a problem from it is water weight gain. So the first thing you do in the morning is weigh yourself, write it down. And you do that every day and you make it a habit. That's the hardest thing to do. And then once your weight gets to a certain point, is it above what your doctor says you should be taking action on? And that action could be, hey, I'm going to increase my Lasix dosage because he's told you can do that. At some point, maybe it's too high and you're out of breath, and now it's a 911 call. So, but how do you react appropriately to those conditions? Again, habit changes. Very, very difficult to make those, but very important, because the not tracking your vitals, not reacting to kind of a green, yellow, red status on those as your doctor has defined them, not taking your meds on time, taking too many. I mean, those are primarily the highest cause of failure for seniors in the home. And we think it's falls, but this contributes to falls. Mobility and safety, it's actually a very, very long list, so I try to consolidate it, but all of your physical facility changes, environment in the home, and the impediments. So think of thresholds as an impediment. I'll give you an example. Coming from a garage, there's usually two steps. An attached garage, there's a step about, I don't know, maybe an inch and a half tall that gets you from the garage floor up onto a pedestal of some kind, or a walkway. And then there can be another 3-inch above that. So, is that safe with a walker, a cane? Does there need to be some yellow paint put on, a ramp put in? Again, that's just one example, and it goes throughout the home. That impediments can be as subtle as the softness of your bed, the height of the bed. Is it safe to get on? Is it safe to get off? Does the I never can remember this word that's on a bed. So you have a spread on top. Does it actually drape over the floor and create a tripping hazard, as an example? That's not unusual. And so the list is long when it comes to physical facility and the impediments. Those things, again, that you can notice. These are just all observations. Are they using their mobility devices correctly to navigate both their internal environment where they live, or even outside the environment, whether that's in the yard, the driveway, a trip to the grocery store, doctor's office, and so on? And then are they completing their activities of daily living? And we kind of listed a few of those earlier: bathing, grooming, dressing, feeding, the basics, safely and consistently. And you can kind of tell that. You could almost put the IEDLs in here, like not getting, good nutrition consistently. It's not unusual for seniors who cannot be as mobile as they once were and stand as long as they can or once could to actually prepare their meals. And so the default to something easy. There are a number of solutions out there that can kind of bring them back into a very safe and consistent methodology. Fire safety, chemical safety. I can't count how many times I've heard stories of someone at home, with a dementia, and it's not the caregiver's fault. So this is not a finger pointing exercise whatsoever. They get hold of that grape juice looking cleaner that you can buy at Lowe's, and they drink it because it looks like grape Kool-Aid. Fire safety is another one. Just making sure things are working correctly. Your fire and smoke detectors. Right? So this is just a short list of mobility and safety. But those are, again, as you're visiting, maybe walking through a loved one's home, a neighbor's home, you can kind of look at and observe and note. And it kind of creates the basis for a conversation. And here's what we talked about a little bit earlier on the independence and autonomy. These are kind of two separate things, but when you break down what it takes to live every day in your environment, these are the basics. And the data that I mentioned earlier to bear that out, this is kind of what floats to the top statistically. Getting your transfers done from bed to wheelchair, wheelchair to toilet, wheelchair to shower and back, bathing, grooming, dressing, toileting, feeding or eating, Those are activities of daily living. Are those occurring safely and consistently? And if not, which ones are not? Is your loved one or your neighbor making sure they've got, they're cleaning up after meals, they're getting the trash out of their houses, their bills are being paid on time, laundry is getting done, it's not piling up somewhere. Is the house in neat and safe order? Do they have a defined process to get help when they need it? That can be as simple as using a smartphone, or if they can afford it, a smartwatch that's voice activated. Hey Siri, call 911, or call my son, or call my daughter, or call my friend, as an example. And again, it's not a perfect solution, won't cover every single situation, but it's certainly, all it takes is one situation, right? And if it would have applied, it would have helped. So how do you get help when you're a bit more isolated than you have been prior in life? Are they enjoying the things that matter most to them? We are creatures of adjustment. And I learned this, it was told to me, so I'm not sure learning is the right word, but I was told this a few months ago, is that humans tend to be the only animal that can adapt to their environments to their detriment. Fancy words. I can get used to things being messy. I can get used to things in environments being unsafe. I can get used to not, and thinking it's okay, right? We're not talking about animals who are abused here, because they're not really used to it. They just have to put up with it. But humans, we can get used to not eating right and being safe and saying it's okay. Have they lost that simple and those meaningful engagements? It can be as simple as reading books, sitting outside, drinking coffee, meeting with friends, playing games, dominoes, cards, what have you. Is it obvious that they don't have the joy, peace, or the connections that they had once? Maybe they're not learning. Learning at any level kind of breeds energy in life. No time for reflection, or they're not able to reflect. It's my excuse is I'm working too much, and I can tell, right, that I need that time to look back and to look forward without the pressure of performing. Are the things that they can do, are they still challenging and intentional? And then what does it look like to have an active life? And again, when it comes to meaningful engagements, meaningful activities can be very simple. They need 20 things done 40 times a week. That's all of us. So think about your own life, and you can make a list. I promise you can get to 50 things that you enjoy doing with no problem at all. Now put them on a calendar and say, do you do these once a day, twice a day, 5 days a week, 10 days a week, just 10 days a week, 7 days a week, and map that out. Are you doing 20 things 40 times a week? Statistically, that actually improves the quality of life for everyone, most of all seniors, who can become isolated and kind of stuck, right, in a degrading environment. Or if they have a caregiver with them, helping them, maybe it's more than one. It's an agency, as an example. We need to think again of care as a system. But it's easy, especially as family members, it's easy to overlook the time and the energy, just like Leah was mentioning earlier, especially if someone's working, or maybe they've given up their full-time job to be a full-time caregiver. But are we communicating, listening to, validating the caregiver? I mean, the least that we can do as neighbors, church members, family members is encourage the caregiver. The next one would be, how do we physically help? And there are a number of ways to do that. Are they getting the education and the training that they need so that they're doing the job as efficiently and effectively as they can? Okay. How do we help them simplify the process and environment of care? Again, one of the hardest things to do for someone in a wheelchair, or someone caring for someone in a wheelchair, is rolling that wheelchair across carpet. It is. It requires more energy. when in fact, a flat floor, a laminate is much easier. That's just one example. A hospital bed can help both the caregiver and the person needing care. You raise it, lower it, tilt it. I mean, let the equipment do the work for you, right? How do you divide and conquer? Maybe again, there's other neighbors, church families, family members who can divide and conquer on not just the care, but like those IADLs, so paying bills, managing the bank accounts, making sure that gets done, because that all takes time. And caregiving is really about time, ultimately. And then how do we support caregivers in taking breaks? My dad, real quickly, was a 33-year quadriplegic. My mom, he was 39 when the car accident occurred, broke his neck. My mom was his primary caregiver. I was a backup. It took a couple of years, and really because she had to learn a lot. But eventually she started taking vacations and trusting people, not just me, but trusting others to spend a week with my dad when he needed it, who eventually started working again after about 3 years, actually learned to drive again, had a better driving record as a quadriplegic than he did before. But it took her some time to trust a few people to be able to care for dad, get him up in the morning, then he'd go to work, get him home, he'd come home, get his meals, get him down, everything that needed to happen there medically for him. And so, kind of come back to that education and training. Is there someone else, church, family, neighbor, who's willing to even just spend a day, a half a day, so that the caregiver can address their own quality of life? Same checklist, same exact checklist for the caregiver. So these are all, again, those are all observations. They can be questions. Primarily, it's observations that you pick up on that give some substance to making a change. And that change can be, again, change in the home, right, where most people want to stay. It can be, if I need to move, maybe it's only even short term, then I can still take that action, or maybe it's long term. But again, it gives a basis for a conversation to occur. And it's fact-based. It's not pointing a finger, right? Not judging. So how do you take action? Well, first ask the question, where's your loved one? Or where's this person? Are they at home? Or are they in the medical system, like a hospital? If they're at home, are you seeing those triggers that I just talked through? Again, is the home safe? What are the costs to ensure that it is? Because none of those things are free to actually change the physical environment. Many are inexpensive, really. I mean, you can buy a ramp, a safe ramp at Lowe's for $150. And it's mobile. You can use it almost anywhere, provided it's the right height and length, right? But is personal care in the home suitable at this point? So as you're going through those items, again, those observations, you're thinking, I think if we just had 2 to 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, coming in to do these things, laundry, light housekeeping, meal prep, could be those, transportation to outings and or appointments, then we can kind of bound the cost that way. So let's bring an expert in. So that can be what you'd had documented before as a personal care agency. Bring the person back. Here's where we stand. Can you help us do this? Yes or no? And they'll be able to do that, guaranteed. Is it for a long-term or a short-term period? Sometimes getting personal care in the home while some physical therapy or occupational therapy is going on has been extended. That can be a short-term. That can be a short-term service, in regards to personal care. And in many times, it gives that person, the one who needs the care, it gives them a goal. If I'm going to have 6 to 8 weeks of physical therapy, and I have someone coming in to kind of back me up, if you will, in the personal care area as well, again with the ADLs and some of those IADLs, I want to be able to do these 3 things that they're doing in 6 weeks. Now I have a goal. I have some line of sight toward reinstating where I'd come from, maybe even improve it. Are they coming from the hospital? Well, you had a plan put together. Remember, we had rehab preference, we had a hospital preference. You have a home health agency preference, you have a choice. It is constrained by insurance, but you ultimately have a choice, or your loved one does. And if you're aware of that choice, execute that choice on their behalf. And the question again is the safe home for return. So it's not just being in the home, but coming back into it. If it's yes, then back to that last slide, set up your system. Okay. If it's the answer is no, pardon me. If the answer is no, is assisted living suitable? And is it short-term or long-term again? Well, in the plan, remember, we had visited a few. So we had some exposure and education, information on them. Would one of those three be suitable, and do they have availability? Because that's always key, right? I mean, it's not unusual that places are full or spoken for. So, or at least in that kind of that process. And so you need to kind of know more immediately what availability looks like, but you know who to call if you need them. And then if you haven't already, and this is kind of way late, and we talked about this a bit earlier on the how do you secure funding and set it up, act on that. So if you've got a long-term care policy, many of them will actually service short-term respite stays or respite services, meaning someone to come into the home, a community-based solution for a period of time on a daily rate, and we'll cover that cost, usually with a waiting period. There can be a private pay period of 30, 60, 90 days. It just depends on how your contract was written, but you can still execute that. Or you may just pay privately. There's another method through Medicaid, totally different conversation. Schedule your move-in and then move in. So if that's the case, and it's going to be a community-based solution, again, whether it's short or long-term, that'll be on a schedule, become something of a project, right? Let's say there's no plan. Not all of us, we're planning at different points in the timeline of our lives. And so let's say that, and I think many of us are like this, if we were honest, we don't really have that kind of plan. And I'm not talking about details. It's that plan I talked about earlier. These 3 blocks, or these 3 things addressed, at least to the point where we know we can kind of take action on them. And, there's no plan, and you really don't know where to start. That's many times in my service that folks just don't know where to start. And they get help through a social worker, a case manager, a nurse, a rehab, a PA, physical therapist, whatever. But by and large, in the medical system, it's going to be either your case manager or social worker on where to start. But you can also secure someone like me. That's my only pitch. Okay. Senior living expert, even resources around that person that are not related directly to senior living, assisted living, memory care, and so on. But I help them, and there's really I make it simple, even for me, is let's put 4 puzzle pieces together. So you have an idea of what the box top of the puzzle will look like. It's kind of like that plan, but now it's on an urgent basis. It needs to get done, and done quickly. What are the care needs? Someone's coming out of the hospital, they're coming out of rehab, skilled nursing. What are the care needs? Those activities of daily living primarily. The IADLs are already kind of embedded in those, okay? But do they need those? Is there a cognitive need or deficit there? And it can even be a short-term, by the way, cognitive deficit, a stroke. Perfect example. Not as always permanent when it comes to a cognitive impact or disability, okay? What is your budget and affordability? So we can walk through those questions. What's affordable? What other sources are available? So my questions go like this, and it feels funny at first, but what is your loved one's marital status? Because once they say divorced and they're a surviving spouse, generally a female, then I don't have to ask about VA resources unless the wife was a veteran. The VA doesn't pay much attention to divorcees, and so, but there can be other sources. And so then I can lead into the veterans benefits if they're applicable in that case. We talk about that. What is your preferred location? Everyone wants the loved one or their neighbor to be close. I tell folks in the Houston area, just plan on 30 minutes. I don't care where you're going, you're going to church, you're going across the street to the grocery store, just plan on 30 minutes to get there, because you never know in Houston what the traffic's going to be like. And then what are their personality preferences? Folks bring to the table their personalities. And so if as much as possible, how do you account for those? Are they active, social? Are they introverts, extroverts, and so on? What sort of things do they like to do? So those are some intangibles, if you will. Visit at least 2 communities. So someone like myself, and there are those others in the Houston area that do what I do, you need some options. 3 or 4 or 5 maybe are good to start with, but of those, start with 2 to go get eyes on them and ask the questions. Just like Kim said earlier, get your and we had, I forget her name, I'm sorry, from Ben Taub on case management. Get eyes on these places because that's really going to solidify a decision. Ink on paper, a web review is a good start, but it's not final. And then schedule an assessment of your loved one. That's going to be somewhat natural. So let's say that you tour or you visit 2 communities, and these are assisted living communities as an example. You like one over the other, and then the next step would be they're going to have to actually give you a thumbs up that they can care for your loved one or that person. So they have to assess them, confirm your pricing, which does that, secure your funding, which we talked about earlier. They'll work with you on scheduling your move-in date. If you're coming from a clinical environment like a hospital or a rehab hospital, skilled nursing facility, that's going to be dictated by your discharge date. And it's so much simpler to discharge and move in from a medical facility than it is from home. It just requires a little more work coming from home that you have to do that the hospital and the social worker could have done for you. And so I can answer those questions later. And then by golly, move in. Transitions, everyone's a little bit different, but transitions can take, I don't know, 3 to 8 weeks. Kind of depends. If there's a cognitive deficit there, a dementia, it might take a little longer. But those who are cognitive and you're just needing that activities of daily living support, it may only take a couple of weeks for you to find a new rhythm or your loved one to find their new rhythm. But that is all I have, Catherine. And so hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of a checklist approach toward this transition. Planning, how do you execute that plan? And then secondly is if you haven't planned, there are resources out there that can help you kind of act in a more urgent or critical situation.